Thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm your host for today's Flex webinar, Aaron Gopin. I'm joined today by Marcus Merritt and Eddie Hudson. Today we're going to be discussing barcodes and label printing. And I do want to preface this discussion by first saying that I will not be covering barcode scanners today. We will mention barcode scanners in passing. However, we're not going to be going into a deep dive on barcode scanners today. I personally believe that we could do a completely separate webinar just based around barcode scanners. With that being said, I do want to go over a couple of things before we get into the live action portion of this webinar. So whether you're someone who is considering going this route for printing your own barcodes, or you already have a label printer set up and in use in your warehouse, I just want to cover a couple of key points before we get started. So when you're buying a printer to use with Flex, we recommend Zebra printers, specifically the GK series. But really, if you're going to purchase a Zebra printer for use with Flex, it's just important to note that you do need a network connection, either wired or wireless. And ideally, you would choose a model that can print with thermal transfer and direct thermal. If you don't know the difference, don't worry. I'll be covering that next. There are other printers available as well from other manufacturers. And these printers typically proclaim their compatibility as being EPL or ZPL compatible. In theory, these printers should work perfectly fine with Flex. However, it's important to note that we have not tested any of these printers from other manufacturers, and so we cannot guarantee that they will function. However, in theory and in practice, they should function the same way. So again, direct thermal versus thermal transfer. Direct thermal is going to be what you see typically in shipping labels or receipts. Materials of these labels are typically paper or polypropylene, and you have the ink inside the label, which is activated by heat. Alternatively, thermal transfer allows you to use stronger label stocks like polyester. It enables you to use stronger adhesives, and you're actually required to use a separate ink. Resin is what we recommend for its durability. You can also use wax, which is less durable. In practice, though, it's important to note that cost between direct thermal and thermal transfer for labels and resin, if you're going to do thermal transfer, is roughly the same. What's important to note, though, is availability. So you might have a local company in your locale that sells these kinds of materials. However, they might only specialize in direct thermal or thermal transfer. So there is a little bit of research that is good to do to see what's most available in your area and what's going to be most cost effective for you, depending on how many labels you're printing, what kind of equipment you're putting them on, etc. And so now just a technical note. So we're going to talk about print languages today. We're going to specifically be talking about ZPL, but it's important to explain where I'm coming from when I talk about ZPL. So EPL is a legacy language. And if you're set up in Flex right now and you've been set up before this month, chances are you just have the single EPL template loaded into your Flex system. They're not very QR friendly. They're not very image friendly. EPL actually does not support newer barcode formats. And while EPL does support images, it converts them into many, many, many characters of text, which makes it not very conducive to working with Flex. On the other hand, ZPL supports many different barcode types, including QR, and includes better support for images and other custom elements like custom fonts. Additionally, I have this third bullet point on this slide titled Others. So the way that Flex works, when you tell Flex to print a barcode, Flex sends a set of instructions to the printer in a very simple fashion. If you've worked with barcodes already in Flex, you'll have known, you'll have seen the template entry. We'll be going over that today as well. But essentially, Flex theoretically supports any type of label printer that can have a simple set of instructions sent to it. We just focus on Zebra because it's tested and true. It's a commercial and industrial product, and it works extremely well with Flex. And again, there are some considerations to make if you are considering using a label printer with Flex. It's best to consider that each printer that you would set up for your organization would only be able to handle one single size of label stock. It is possible to change them out. It can just be a sort of drawn out process and not very streamlined. So to that end, if you are looking to print more than one size of label stock, it is recommended to have an individual printer for each size of label stock that you would like to print. Furthermore, label size is also an important consideration to make as well, because depending on the average size of your equipment, what you're looking to barcode, what maybe you're not looking to barcode, whether it's a serialized or non-serialized item, it's important to consider that if you only do one printer and one label stock, that the size of that label stock is most conducive to the size of the equipment that you already have in your organization. And again, in the same vein as label size, it's also important to consider what kind of information you'd like to include. Are you just looking to include your company's name and phone number, or are you looking to include much more information like your address, your logo, your website address, things of that nature? Being a good size label stock for your organization is going to enable you to control how much information you can include in that label template. And again, there are some other technical considerations to make as well. In order to set up your label printer with Flex, you will need administrator access to the router of your organization's network. If you're unsure about these things, you might need to reach out to your ISP, or if you contract your networking hardware out to a third party, you might have to reach out to them to get some more information on accessing your router. Again, also, you may want to reach out to your internet service provider and confirm whether or not your organization has a static public IP address. This is very important to do. Flex will look to your static public IP address in order to print to your label printer. If your public IP address is not static, doesn't necessarily prevent you from using a label printer. It just means that periodically your internet service provider may change your public IP address. When this happens, you will temporarily lose your ability to print to your label printers. To that end, it's just really important that if you're going this route, a good first step to do is to reach out to your internet service provider and just confirm or deny whether or not you have a static public IP address. And if you don't, to put in a request to have that done. So that really just covers the first bit of considerations and points I wanted to cover. That being said, let's jump right into printer setup. So I do want to preface this section by saying I will be conducting today's training using a Zebra GK420T. That's the printer that's currently pictured in the slide you're seeing and is the one that you can also see up in the right-hand corner. This particular model does have the ability to print direct thermal or thermal transfer. To clarify, we'll be printing with thermal transfer with a resin ribbon, and we will be printing on 2-inch by 1/2-inch stock. If you are in a country where inches are not the preferred form of measurement, you can perform a simple conversion of inches into millimeters to find the same size label stock in your country. I do believe the standard label size for a 2-inch by 1-inch is a roughly 50 millimeter by 25 millimeter label. So with that being said, let's just jump right into a video that's going to kind of cover what setting up your printer is going to look like. So the first thing you're going to see when you get your printer is you're going to need to connect your power source as well as your network connection to the printer. In this case, this is just going to apply to a wired printer. Wireless printers have a similar but slightly different setup process. Once you've got your printer plugged into power and networking, you're going to go ahead and open it up. And once you open it up, the first thing you're going to want to do is put in your resin stock. If you are using resin stock, you'll see that the dowels that the resin stock sits on are notched. And that is so the resin can sit in the printer in a firm position, get you nice, clean, accurate prints. So you put the first roll on the feed side and you make sure that that is secured. And then you come around to the top side, the return side, and you make sure that the top dowel is also locked into place up top. So the resin will roll from one roll to another, and you can actually see where we've lost a little bit already because we've actually used this roll of resin before. The only difference between this and a brand new roll is that the top roll is going to be free. It's not going to have anything on it, and you'll unpeel part of the roll and you'll adhere it to the other roll so that they can loop around. And then you'll want to put your label stock in. Again, I'm using 2-inch by 1/2-inch polyester label stock. We're going to go ahead and we'll separate the holder. We'll make sure our roll of labels is in there nice and firmly. And we'll make sure to put it under the guides to make sure that we get nice, straight, even prints, and make sure that it is centered up and placed square on the roller. Once you've got it all placed up, you'll go ahead and close the lid. Make sure to press down firmly on that lid on both corners, otherwise it might not latch into place. With all that done, you can go ahead and turn on your printer and wait for it to boot up and connect to your network. And you can press that feed button a couple times to make sure that your label printer is properly loaded, and also to ensure that your label printer's sensor can make sure that it has the right size label stock installed. If it does have the right size label stock installed, you'll see one single label print out when you press that feed button. So now this part is optional, but if you don't believe that you're going to be able to find your printer on your network just looking at your router, you can go ahead and press and hold that feed button, and your printer will actually print out a configuration list. On that configuration list, you'll be able to see things like your IP address, if it's connected to your network, and you'll also be able to see things like the MAC address of the printer as well. MAC address is kind of like a VIN number. If your if a device on your network was a car, the IP address is kind of the license plate. MAC address is the VIN number. So the reason why I mentioned this is we're going to use that MAC address to make sure that our IP address for our printer stays static, because we don't want our printer's IP address to change either. So with that being said, we're going to go into my router to kind of just show you what the next step of this process looks like. So, and this is the part where I'm just going to generalize a little bit. This is most likely not going to look the same for you. We all have different kinds of routers. We all have different grades of equipment. There are commercial routers with lots and lots of different configuration options, and there are more consumer-oriented routers that have a lot more simple configuration sets. However, you can generalize the names of most of these settings that I'm going to demonstrate. They will most likely be called something similar, if not the exact same, on your own router. So the first thing to consider is my IP address of my printer. And so for my router, what I can do is I can go over to a setting called DHCP reservation. And if I look at this list, I can see it's actually populated with a couple of things that are already on my network here. But if we look at the top, we can actually see my Zebra printer, the MAC address of my Zebra printer, and we can see that it's reserved on this IP address. If this wasn't already set up, for my router, it's as simple as selecting the MAC address from a drop-down list or manually entering it here and just selecting an available IP address from a list to make that device's permanent static IP address. Additionally, the other consideration to make for your network on your router is to set up a port forward. So on my router, if I go under my firewall settings, I have an option here for port forwarding. And so again, I've set this up beforehand, but it's really the same process whether this is set up or not. You either have your device's local IP address, and then you have your ports to forward. So in a default configuration, Flex is going to look at port 9100. See how I have this set up down here, TCP UDP 9100. The TCP and UDP is just a technical aspect of the ports you're forwarding. Doing TCP and UDP just make sure that we're covering all of our bases to make sure that the commands can get through to the printer. And so we have a tool that we can use to make sure that we have properly set up this step of the configuration. And so next step you want to do after making sure that your port is forwarded to your printer is you want to go ahead and check that you've done that successfully. The website I like to use is yougetsignal.com/tools/open-ports. However, if you go to Google and search for a port checking tool, you will either find this directly or you will find another tool online that can perform the exact same thing. The reason why I like this one is it will automatically fill in this field with my public IP address. This number is very important because this is the number that we're going to be putting into Flex. And again, we're just going to check port 9100. That's the port that we set up our printer to forward to, and that's the one that's going to be default in Flex. It is important to note you can make it whatever. You just need to make sure that you tell Flex what port it is and your router what port it is, and those are the same port. If I go ahead and click this check, I'll get a message that says port 9100 is open on my public IP address. And so with that all being said, we can now make a couple of assumptions. Our printer is on our local network. Our port is forwarded to our printer on our local network, and we know our public IP address, this value right here. I'm going to go ahead and copy it, and we're going to go over to Flex. So, and this is just another key point to mention specifically for this webinar. As of right now, currently, the ability to print barcodes, configure barcode printers in Flex 5 has not currently been implemented. As that progresses, this may change, but in the event that there is a large enough change, then we will do another webinar. With that being said, we're going to be doing all of our configuration and all of our operations today, this webinar in Flex 4. So, first things first, we're going to go ahead and make sure our printer is set up. Whether you're a new Flex customer or an old Flex customer, as long as these basic settings haven't been changed, all we'll need to do is put our IP address in and run a test print to make sure our printer is properly configured. So I'm going to go to System Settings, and I'm going to go down to Raw Printers. And we can see we have the single printer that's usually in here by default. And if we double click to open it, you'll see I've actually already set this up ahead of time. But the only difference between what I've done ahead of time and what this looked like before I set this up, that's the only difference. A stock Flex installation and you haven't changed any of these settings, this is essentially identically how this screen will look. So as long as you've done all the configuration steps up to this point properly, all you'll need to do is paste your public IP address into that field and click update. And so I'm going to perform a test print. And so I'm going to just open up an inventory item. And if I go ahead and click print model barcode, you'll see, again, this is basic stock Flex setting where this is already all set up with a basic template. If I go ahead and click this and click accept and print 1, we'll see that we actually got something to print out of the printer. Now, again, it's important to note what you're seeing in that corner image is a single barcode printed across 2 barcodes. This is because the standard template in Flex is usually a 2-inch by 1-inch, and I'm printing on 2-inch by 1/2-inch. So in my personal situation, the next step for me is going to be to incorporate a new template into Flex, which properly conforms to that label size and fits on a single label. So with that being said, we just did an update yesterday on the Help Center article. So if you go to the Help Center article today and you type print, and you click barcode printer setup, there's a new section at the top of this article. Really, it just goes along with everything we're talking about today. But the bottom line is new Flex customers starting from roughly around this month are getting new printer templates included with their systems. As far as not changing settings in existing customers' systems, we're not able to retroactively include those templates. However, those templates are now available on the barcode printer setup page on the Help Center. And so we have 4 new templates that are now being included for new Flex customers. We have a standard 2x1. You have a 2x1 with a QR now. We have a 2x1/2 inch, and then we have a 2x1/2 inch with what's called a Datamatrix, which is similar to a QR code, but has a smaller footprint, and so fits onto that barcode a little bit easier. Again, and this is just my one point that I'm going to make for scanners, is if you're going to print a Datamatrix or a QR, you do need to have what's called a 2D barcode scanner or imager. If you have a Motorola LI 4278, it will not be able to scan data matrices or QR codes. In any case, if you're interested in learning more about the new templates, if you're interested in incorporating them into your system, we have a download link right here where you can download all 4 files in a format that can be edited with ZebraDesigner, which is something else we're going to be talking about here momentarily, or you can also just use the included text files to drop them directly into Flex and customize them on the fly. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and set up the standard 2x1/2 inch barcode for use in our system. So I'm going to click back over to Flex, get these tabs closed out. And so for the sake of explanation, we're going to set this all up as a new template. We're not going to replace our existing template. So there's a couple of tabs that we want to get open. We're going to open barcode printing, and we're going to open raw printer templates. We're going to put the template into raw printer templates first, and then we're going to set a preference for that template on the barcode printing preferences tab. So I'm going to go ahead and click new raw printer template. Very, very simple dialog that opens up. I'm going to be copying over my template from a tab off screen. I'm just going to go ahead and paste it in. Again, don't be scared if this looks like a lot. Again, all these files are available to download and look at and play with on the updated Help Center article. We're just going to give this a simple name. We'll call it 2x0.5. We can give this a code if we want. We'll call it half because it's a half side. And then we'll say that our barcode printer that we have in our system is one of the printers that supports that template. We can go ahead and check that box, and we can click Create. All right. So now if I go back to raw printer templates and reload this tab, we can see that my half size template is now loaded into the system. And we can also additionally come over to the preferences tab now, and we can create a new barcode print preference. This is the step that enables you to select a new template when you go to print a barcode out of Flex. So if I go ahead and click new, I can select my template, my 2x1/2 inch. I can select my printer, and I can set it to print from my default location. And if I want, I can also make this the location default, which makes it the first selected template when I go to print a barcode. In this case, because my label printer has this specific size stock, I can go ahead and click yes. Click create. And so now if I go and open up another inventory item, and print that same model barcode again on our new template and hit accept, and go ahead and click 1. We see that only one label printed out this time, and now we have a much more compact label, better formatted for that size of stock. So if we go and take a closer look at that, we can actually see that we have a slight issue. So we can see that it looks like the top 1 or 2 pixels of that label are being cut off. And so with that being said, I'm going to segue into the next section of our webinar today, which is going into the editing, customization, and tweaking of your label templates. So I've got a couple of different options now, but personally, I would recommend ZebraDesigner, but I've also discovered a new tool. It's an online label viewer that allows you to get real-time feedback on any changes you might make to a label. But before we get into that, I want to come back to the printer template. And we just take a look at this printer template. It looks a little intimidating, but what I'd like to do is try and demystify that just a little bit. Syntax. So the example you're seeing on your screen is the string of the template that tells the template to print the name of the item. We can see we have a bunch of letters and numbers, these up carets, and then we actually have the portion of this line that Flex actually cares about, which is the element.preferred display string. That tells Flex to print the name of the item, barcode and serial number, depending on what is available for Flex to see for that particular inventory item. But again, we can break this down and demystify it. So we have this first section right here, this FT22197. FT is a command. Most of these sets of letters directly following an up caret is a command. I will be including a link in the barcode printer setup article that will also include a direct link to Zebra's programming guide. If you are very interested in doing it yourself, you can reference Zebra's printing guide, and it will give you a complete explanation of every single command that you could put in a printer template and what that command does. In this case, FT and the numbers that precede it are a positioning command that helps us decide where this particular element sits on the label. The next set of characters are a font command. This tells the printer what font to use, and these values determine the size of the font. Next, we've got our text box command. So that's what FB. FB is actually field block. There are a bunch of different commands to create sections of text on a label. Field block is but just one of them. But we can see those numbers have specific purposes. The first number determines the width in Zebra calls dots, or you might think of them as pixels for that particular text box. The 5 determines how many lines that text box is allowed to print. The 0 defines line spacing. In this case, 0 does not mean no line spacing. 0 just means default line spacing. L is going to be our justification, which is going to justify all of our text to the left. And FH and FD are closeout commands for that particular value and help us set up the ability to put in the token that Flex looks for. So again, I understand that this can be a little bit confusing, but really the important thing to keep in mind is that with the tool I'm going to show you next, you can switch these numbers around and directly see how they impact your label. So with that being said, I'm going to go back to Flex. We're going to go ahead and copy out our active template from Flex, and we're going to go over to Labelary. So it's labelary.com, and then you can click the online viewer, or you can go to labelary.com/viewer.html. And if we take a look at what comes up here by default, we actually see that this is very similar to our template that we've been working with. So we can actually use this online tool to virtually generate our label and make direct tweaks to it if we want. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. I can also come down here and adjust my label size. So I'm going to say my label is 2 inches by ½ inch. And so we can see now that our content does seem to be centered up on the label. But if, again, from when we did that test print, we actually saw that everything was riding a little too high. These are things that can happen just in the normal course of running a label printer. The reason this happens is your label printer uses a sensor to determine where on the roll of labels it is. Sometimes it doesn't get the configuration right away. I've also personally seen this happen a lot in more open air warehouses, unair conditioned warehouses, where you're dealing with things like dust and dirt can definitely dirty the inside of the printer and can cause slight issues like that. From just making sure that your printer is properly calibrated first and then tweaking your labels is going to make sure that when whatever your final setting ends up being, that stays consistent when you're printing your labels, especially if you're changing out or replacing your label stock. So again, from our slide, we can actually just change some of these values directly in order to bring our company name and company phone values down the label a little bit. So again, these first ones, these determine positioning, X and Y, right? X is left to right, Y is up and down. We can actually see that reflected when we see that company name is only 14 dots out from the top left corner, and company name is 253 dots out from the top left corner. And we can both see that they are aligned, as the Y value is the same for both of them. So we need to move them down. Like I said, it looked like they were about 2 pixels too high. So we're just going to change these to 25. If I go ahead and click redraw, you'll see that those values very slightly moved down the label. So now I can go ahead and I can copy this. I can take it back into Flex. I can go ahead and click update. Now that I've updated, I can go back and we can try and print another label. All right, so let's take a look at that. And now we can see that our company name and company phone completely clear the top portion of that label. So that's really just, in a basic sense, how you can use a web-based tool like Labelary to quickly make some quick tweaks to your label and at the same time ensure that you're not changing anything or corrupting anything on your label that's going to otherwise prevent it from properly working with your system. So that's really just basic customization. But I also mentioned that ZPL has a lot of support for custom elements, images, things of that nature. So let's get into ZebraDesign. You're going to find ZebraDesigner by going online. Really just do a quick Google search for it. It's not going to be very hard to find. If you see, I just Googled ZebraDesigner. The direct link to download it from Zebra's website is the second link. If I go ahead and click that, I can scroll down a little bit and we can see I got a download link right here. And I can come down here and we can download the exe file. And so with that being said, I do want to just talk really briefly for all of our Mac users out there. So as it turns out, ZebraDesigner is not supported on Mac OS. ZebraDesigner is unfortunately a Windows-only program, which is not to say that you're completely out of luck. It's just that there are a few different alternatives. None of them are technically officially supported by Zebra. And as you can see, they are paid softwares. There are these softwares typically do not have a free version, and if they do, they might be limited to the point that you may not be able to use them properly for use with Flex, which is why I recommend Labelary. But again, if you are completely Mac based and you are looking to have a custom template, it could be a consideration to make that you might want to have a Windows PC on hand just in order to make those customizations. So With that being said, I'm just going to briefly talk about installing ZebraDesigner. When you install it, the installer will most likely tell you in some way that you don't have any printers installed on your system, and it will ask you if you want to install a printer on your system. This does run contrary to what we have previously given as direction for setting up printers, in that we tell people don't set them up normally. And that does still apply. The only time you'd want to set up your printer normally with your PC is if you also wanted your label printer to do double duty, like as a fancy label printer. So you can run through the installation process and you can come up to the dialog where it will ask you to install a printer. The important thing to keep in mind is just make sure whatever printer you install, there's a lot of different versions for the printers that you can install. Make sure you install a ZPL version of that printer. So if I pull up my printers that I have installed on my system right now, you can see I have a ZebraDesigner GK420 printer already installed on my system. Your printer list should look somewhat like this when you go to open ZebraDesigner for the first time. The reason why, ZebraDesigner won't let you open a label unless you have a printer installed. So I can go ahead and open ZebraDesigner, and I actually have a Flex logo that I'm going to be incorporating into a label today. And so I can go ahead and open up a existing label that I was working on. But again, like I mentioned, all of these files are now available on the Help Center for you to edit, play with, customize as well. So we've loaded up in ZebraDesigner. We can see we've got our basically the same thing we were seeing in Labelary. You know, we just have a different user interface, very Office-like, very Microsoft Office, PowerPoint reminiscent. So if you're familiar with those programs, it should be very easy transition to work with this program for you. With that being said, all we're going to do here is we're going to take that label that you can see up in the right-hand corner coming from the camera, and we're going to move that barcode over a little bit. We're going to move the rest of our elements over a little bit, and we're going to incorporate the Flex logo into this template. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to click and drag some of this stuff over to the right. And then I can go ahead and I can add my image. My Flex logo. And I'm just going to size that up. And so you can actually see when it's sitting off of the label, I actually get a warning. It's letting me know it's out of the label. The reason why it warns you is like when I printed out that double-sized label on my existing stock, if your template has any element that goes beyond the borders of the label, your printer might interpret that as two labels. And you don't want to waste label stock, you don't want to waste resin, you don't want to waste anything. So just ensure that if you're customizing your own label template, that all of your elements have fit on the design area. So we can see, just like in PowerPoint, I've got a little handle at the top of my image that lets me rotate it. I'm going to turn it 90 degrees, and we're going to size it down so that we can put it on our label. And so again, right now it's an exact fit. When we go to print it, we might find that the alignment is a little off. So what I do sometimes is I will make the logo a little bit smaller and try to center that up a little bit better. We've customized our label with an image. We're going to go ahead and translate this into something we can use with Flex. So I'm going to print this label. And so the default settings are just going to be as if I were going to print to a printer that was already connected to my computer, but that's not what we're trying to do here at all. We want to turn this into text so we can put it into Flex. So we're going to go ahead and click Print to File. There's a couple of settings here to keep in mind. We have speed and darkness. Speed, just set it as high as it goes. Darkness, we want darkness to be around 20. So, and I do want to explain this. This might seem confusing if you're still using the older style template or otherwise an EPL template. When you print EPL, the printer looks at its internal settings for speed and darkness, printing that label. ZPL simplifies that a little bit. It keeps the speed and darkness settings on the label template instead. So there's not any need to go navigate to the IP address of your printer on your computer and log into the login form on the printer and change the printer settings directly. That's not necessary with a ZPL template. You set the speed and the darkness on the template when you turn it into a file. We've got a couple other things here too. We've got our text values. These are just ensuring that things like our element token and our barcode token are going into the template in plain text, which is how we need them to be, because we need them to be in plain text because we need Flex to be able to see that we're calling the preferred display string in the barcode. So again, set my speed, set my darkness. All of this looks good. Only one label. This is all right. We're going to go ahead and click print, and then I'm going to save dialog. So I'm going to just go ahead and save this to my desktop. I'll put a W on it so I know it's from the webinar. And you'll see it's going to print what's called a PRN file. And I don't have any other choices. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to generate that PRN file. And you'll see that it's showing up on my system as a text file. When you open one the first time, it most likely will not show this way. You'll get a dialog that's going to look more like this. But really, if you don't have Notepad up top, just scroll down until you find Notepad, open the file in Notepad. And again, we get some text that looks very, very similar to the template that we just put in, with the sole addition of this stuff right here. This is our image. And this is the problem with EPL. In EPL, this is orders longer than this. And the problem with that is Flex has a character limit for templates. So we have to do ZPL if we want images. Otherwise, our templates don't play nicely with Flex. So we're going to take that template and we're going to put it back into Flex and see how it looks. So I just come back to my template. We delete all this out, and then we paste our new template in. Again, you can see the image here. We can also take this template over to Labelary if we want, and we want to double check it there. We can do that, and we can redraw it, and we can see that our logo is in the label now. So let's test it in Flex. Go ahead and click Update on this. Come back to the item. We're going to print another model barcode on that half-size template. Accept. Accept. Hey, and now we can see we have a Flex logo on our barcode. And so this is really the process that you're going to go through when you're designing a custom label template for your organization. You'll generate the template in either Labelary or ZebraDesigner. You'll load it into Flex. You'll do a test print to check alignment, check positioning, check to make sure that nothing is running off the sides. And then you'll come back, do some tweaks, and then revise, reiterate, rinse, and repeat. Again, I copied over that template that we did not change before. And so our company name and company phone are now riding up over the barcode again. So again, in that same procedural vein, you would then take that template back into Labelary. You'd tweak the company name and company phone like we did before. You'd move them a little bit down the label, reprint, check, rinse, repeat until you achieve the look that you're going for. Additionally, when you're working with label stock like this, you can include more than one type of label on a printer. So I briefly mentioned we have a Datamatrix template for label printing. So let me go ahead and load that in, and we'll see what that looks like real quick, just so I can show you all. So again, I want to just knock this back to 0 just to make sure. So we're going to do barcode printing, and we're going to do raw printer templates. We're going to go ahead and make a new raw printer template. We're going to call it Datamatrix. Barcode printer, and then I'm going to come over to my other tab, and I'm going to copy that template and paste it in. There's our template. We can see again, it looks very similar to the other template. The only difference with this one is we have this line right here that tells the barcode printer, hey, don't print the barcode number as a regular barcode, print it as a Datamatrix code. So we can go ahead and click create. And again, I just want to mention these are the baseline templates. These are not pre-tweaked for my printer. So again, we might run into that same issue where we are having a little bit of the template runoff of the label. But let's just go ahead and see what that looks like. So here, I'm actually going to do this for you guys. And so you can see we have a completely different looking barcode now. We have this nice small square footprint similar to a QR code that now occupying that space. That allows us to print more information on this label. The name of this item isn't quite long enough to flow over to the second line, but with a longer item name, this template will display the name on 2 lines, which can be, especially if you have very descriptive item names, can be very, very helpful in the long run as far as having very, explanative barcodes in your system. And so with that being said, I do believe that wraps up the planned content for today.